Welcome. The following is a three-part series regarding art in the Borderland region of El Paso, Juarez. The first of these is Art in the Borderland Murals. Declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1997 and considered one of the largest and oldest orphanage and hospital complexes in the Americas, the Hospicio Cabañas in Guadalajara, Mexico, serves today as a museum to muralistic frescoes of the iconic and Mexican muralist Jose Clemente Orozco. One of the other big three of these Mexican muralists, is of course Diego Rivera, but Orozco's the observed frescoes that will be emphasized are certainly Clemente Orozco's, given the struggle of colonization by the Spanish. Now, these frescoes were realized between 1938 and 1939 and found within the central and primary chapel of the orphanage. If you've never been, the place is called Hospicio Cabañas, and his frescoes within that orphanage are noted, entitled, considered the Sistine Chapel of the Americas, and they are indeed a very impressive sight. Now, the frescoes generally illustrate the clash between a pre-Hispanic civilization and the conquest of the Spanish. One Orozco likes to illustrate as mechanical and unnatural. As observed here, you see a type of mechanistic type of figure. Of course, there's the wheel, and it's not to say that the wheel is necessarily a bad thing, but it is a bad thing if it's imposing upon the nature of an indigenous culture. So as you observe here, the type of mechanism that Orozco is certainly putting into place here. Now, amongst these is the allegorical Man on Fire fresco. Many consider this to be Orozco's magnus opus. And if you stare at it straight on, right at the center upwards, one gets this feeling that the entity is certainly floating upward into that abyss of fire, so to speak. Now, interpretively, this mural can undertake many possible interpretations, but there is one common theme the painting orients us towards: that freedom is not possible without suffering. Now, the story of Spaniards' conquest parallels the many other stories offering progress, innovation, and surfacing from a banal, primitive state, only for these indigenous natives to discover that such progress is mechanizing and dehumanizing in reshifting their cultural way of life onto one better suited for management by an imperialist entity. Orozco, in essence, tells the tale of the oppressed and the oppressor. And this is certainly a story that we hear continuously, really truly on a worldly scale, right? Of the notion of progress. One can even recall, maybe even in England, the Romantic poets, who many of them wanted to sustain a more natural way of life, but found themselves battling the industrious and progressive ideals of what's known as the Industrial Revolution. And many of them, of course, wanted to go to a more primitive classical times. Now, in the Borderland city of El Paso, Texas, lies a unique parallel to the murals of Orozco. Beneath the framings of the I-10 freeway lies an open and symbolic space named Lincoln Park. And it is here that El Paso's moralistic clash is retold and reconfigured. Now, there's many parks like this all across the nation. With that type same of Lincoln Park theme, noting the calling for an ancestral an ancestral time and place of before. Now, the identity conception, in this case at least in Lincoln Park, the identity conception of a Chicano seems outdated and diminished. But here in Lincoln Park, such a concept is emphasized. Intertwined between a metaphysical and epistemic understanding, an artist asks, ¿Qué es Chicano? What is Chicano? What is that root that defines this nominalization of a Chicano? Now, if you notice down towards the bottom, you see this type of insect-like creature, right? And one can infer that perhaps it is that of the Chicano being an entity that is often diminished, that the minority itself is a type of a vermin or a cockroach, an insect, if you will. Now, this is going to surface, this certainly surfaces many ideals to the iconic writer Franz Kafka. Now, Franz Kafka was a minority himself as a Czech Jewish citizen in Germany, and there he wrote the well-known absurdist book, The Metamorphosis, which he published in 1915. Now, the nature of this book is that the protagonist, Gregor Samsa, probably, even though the book is fiction, one can interpret it in the psychoanalytic sense that it's Kafka himself who's the protagonist, even though the protagonist, of course, is entitled Gregor Samsa. But in the book, the book certainly begins with the protagonist waking up, and he has difficulty getting out of bed because he has awoken to be a vermin, a large cockroach, if you will, or bug, or strange entity. And in essence, he's become an alienated type of self. Now, much in the way that a mechanical society dehumanizes the natural orientation of human beings, so too are humans stretched thin and exploited due to a failure to rely on the land, and more directly, due to a failure to rely on their own behalf to sustain themselves. In turn, humans must now submit themselves to a machine or system, and in doing so, become alienated vermin who can no longer integrate themselves onto the artifices and non-organic structures of a pseudo-mechanical society. America, the land of the free, but by artistic depiction here, it nevertheless holds a hierarchy that defaces people and their organic sense of identity. Now, the mural here demonstrates an instance where a being, one probably inferring a minority, is struggling to cross the previous dividing mark of the Rio Grande. The Rio Grande is this place, is this river, right? It's the Grand River, the large river, that divides El Paso, Texas, and Juarez, Mexico, right? As a border town, generally and historically, that was the main dividing feature. Now today, the irony, of course, is that there's a defacement of the Rio Grande by means of this iron fence. But the entity here, right, the minority, the assumed minority, he's stuck in limbo, stuck in having to leave the symbolism of a family. You notice the left-hand side, you see the roses, perhaps symbolic of family, of home, of the motherland, so to speak, and try to make a sense of life. by absorbing a symbolic death and becoming a laboring self. And so the Rio Grande today, as noted previously, from east to west El Paso is indeed defaced by an iron fence, right? So it's almost like, even though it was a dividing feature, this dividing feature of the Rio Grande itself is noted in that previous mural, and now maybe there's a new redefining of the Rio Grande. The Rio Grande has now transcended onto that notion of the iron fence. Anyhow, perhaps this is why Aztlan is transcendent from the mythical home of the Aztec people onto the former territories of Mexico. And much in the same manner that Aztlan transcends at an international level, so too does it transcend the very lifelines of nature. And we'll notice this by a series of artists. The iconic Mexican artist Frida Kahlo, whose surreal and magically realist paintings explored issues of identity and post-colonialism in her native Mexico, but they also applied to the divisions of industry and progress created between borders. Now she visited, I believe it was Chicago, of course. I believed her husband Diego Rivera also visited New York, and was asked to do these iconic murals of sorts. But Kahlo herself, right? She'll note this division between the borders. And this is most noted in her self-portrait on the borderline between Mexico and the United States. Here, you witness a Frida who comes from the land where difficulty and death are commonplace. So you see notions, you see the symbolic skull down there at the bottom. You see the clash between the top, between the sun and the moon. You see the lightning striking of sorts. And so here too, even though there's death, you see the destructive, the temple, it's a little destroyed there. But even though, despite these markers of death due to the difficulty, right, so are the roots of nature, right? There's also a beauty to it. There's a sense of nature, of those aspects of the divine and tradition. So there's a very organic, very natural sense of being within the scope of her homeland of Mexico. And even if not directly, it's at least idealistic, right? The idealistic sense of that ancestry. While that other place, the place where nature has succumbed to industry and progress, it is a place she finds difficult to exclude. Difficult for it, nevertheless, it is nevertheless the land of opportunity, regardless of its machinery, its artificial sense of being, its alienation from friends, family, and nature itself. So there it is. There's a bit of a division. You got the organic nature of the homeland and the progressive nature of the America, right, of the U.S. And she doesn't necessarily exclude, even though it is very different, right? She nevertheless does not exclude it because she's conscious that it's almost like a necessary evil, so to speak. And I hate to refer to it as an evil, but there's certainly harms to industry, right? Well, here at Lincoln Park, Frida is indeed reminisced. Remember, for her love of nature, a woman whose heart is within that native mythical Mexican city, desiring to synchronize the boundaries of the here and the there. So here's Frida, and it's noting more of the richness of nature, right? The traditions of nature, the mythical, the ancestral. And also here at Lincoln Park, you see some of this kind of Aztec typology of sorts, symbolism. Now, underneath the freeway, the American and Mexican flags are also on unison and on display. And right across from these two flag markers, there's an Aztlan marking, right, which details the former territories of Mexico, thus making it evident. So there's no exclusion here, right? There's not necessarily it's an us versus them mentality, but rather a synchronization, a type of unifying of sorts. There's also a homage to the victims of 9/11, where they are an eagle. It hovers protectively above a blood-red sky, promoting a sense of hope between the two towers. Whether intentional or not, there's a slight patterning of the eagle's feathers to an Aztec warrior like Cuitlahuac. And yes, of course, the feathers are much more marked in the 9/11, but there's that inference, right? There's that, you have all these Aztlan, Aztec ancestral markers that it inferences and reminisces of the indigenous natives of before. In a similar manner, there's much magic within these murals, embodying aspects of magical realism. Now, magical realism is a sense of realism, but that it also includes an integration of that which is magical, where an artistic sense of realism merges with the fantastical and magical attributes of a beyond. It is one where the Hispanic knight, the Pachuco, is deemed worthy of flying a Pegasus-like horse amidst the cosmos. So that's fascinating, right? You see the synchronization of the here and the there, right? Even though Pegasus is not necessarily Aztec, it's still that notion of the mythical, of the magical, which is very interesting. It is also one where Orozco's man on fire, a Prometheus-like entity, provides the fire of enlightenment, of creativity, of liberty, and unification. Muralists Carlos Callejo and Daniel Hernandez position the world there at the center, while the mythic and classical endeavors of this Prometheus-like god encircle the very sun with the symbolic gestures of Aztec ancestry. You witness it there when you got that fire-like entity. Again, probably, noting and inferring Prometheus. But he's circling the sun, right? Circling the sun, which is very interesting. And so despite all the fictional demeanor, the magical realism embodied in the circle provides a sense of hope that the warrior demeanor of before transcends onto the competencies of Hispanic citizens today. So amongst the diversity of murals, Callejo and Hernandez, they continue to synchronize magical realism with the richness and production of the land. There you see another mural with that magical realism of sorts, of that representative figure in the middle, perhaps Mother Earth. You see the corn breeding from the land. You see the bit of Aztlan markers up at the top, right? Here, the symbolic corn of the earth is summoned and triggered from the temples of before. But as depicted here, sometimes it comes to be that such callings bear snakes. But why snakes? Of course, you have that famous example, right, in the biblical Christian story of the Jews who can't get to the promised land, and in fact they keep kind of doing things the wrong way a little bit, and so you get snakes biting at them. Well, same here. Why snakes? Well, because the land has been corrupted, right? The land, and it's not necessarily an environmental argument. It's more of a cultural argument. So it's one where ideals of colonialism, right, have triggered a bit of this maybe negative feeling. So why snakes? Why this notion of the snakes? Well, um, what's happened with many minorities, right? It's perhaps a stereotype. Nevertheless, it is that labor and work that provides minorities with a sense of liberty, integrity, and ganas, right? Motivation. For it is such work that grants them independence and furthers their ability to provide and return the favor to the land. We provide the nourishing liquid onto the earth, and Mother Earth is joyful in return. You witness it here. You see here another aspect of the magical realism of a representative, this figure of Mother Earth, and she's receiving the the natural rejoicing of the water that is triggering and rooting a fruitfulness of the land, so to speak. So this is evident in a couple of murals. You see it here as well. There's certainly the notion of the corn that grows from the land. And what does corn breed? Well, there's a lot of food that corn develops, and it's not just corn. It can also be certainly vegetables and things of the sort. Here is another mural, and you can get the notion of the tortillas, and there's tamales, made of the corn and things of the sort. So that's pretty interesting, right? And there's also, for example, regarding how there's this real interesting division between the land and laboring. Well, there's that reverence of the Mexican workers amongst the best of working laborers. How in 1986, the state of Georgia was given the opportunity to host the Centennial Olympic Games, and with less than 3 months to finish, immigrants, both documented and undocumented, particularly from Mexico, they were called upon to finalize the Centennial Olympic Park. And in a similar manner, Lincoln Park itself allows to provide that sense of life. From vegetables and fruits to the very essence of life itself, is it not the earth that provides the corn and the corn that provides the food and nourishment? In another mural, it states, this mural represents a place, the Chichihuahuco, a place where children who passed away would travel to. This according to the Nahua culture. And this place was a tree whose branches would drip the milk that would nourish the babies who would one day return to the earth. So despite the laboring schemes, right, again, it's a calling for the land, so to speak. The land itself is a type of divinity of sorts. And have you not heard of that non-myth in which the Tarahumara Indians of Chihuahua, both males and females, who not only run marathons but ultra marathons on a staple diet of corn, is it the magic of the land that grants them this magical gift? Right? It's really interesting, and it is very true. You see the records of these Tarahumara Indians. Many of them, I think Nike tried to provide many of them with shoes, and they simply rejected it. They'd rather run barefoot or on sandals, right? So interesting, right? They'd rather run in sandals. But at the core, right? At the core is that it is indeed the land that empowers the minority. But also, it is not only Mother Earth that needs from us, but mothers themselves in dealing with the burdens of feminicide, with countless of women burdening the death of mothers and daughters and nieces and cousins and whatever sense of kin you can think of. But the borderland region, particularly in the area of Juarez, unfortunately, and it has toned down a bit, but unfortunately, it's so inundated with the burdens of feminicide, right? Of the death of young ladies, of women. It's a terrible, terrible scheme. Um, so, so what of these murals, right? Well, hope is surfaced from the markers of Aslan and magical realism. Um, and there's a sense of this magical realism with the cosmos, right? Of a tie of this of the divine found somehow, some way in the cosmos, and it's evident certainly in the cosmos, but there's also a sense, cosmos, of course, in the divine, and certainly in nature, right? Certainly in nature. But as pointed out by Frida Kahlo, there's also a synchronizing, a type of synchronization with nature and the motherland, with that which is nominalized as mechanical. So too do the murals of El Paso's Lincoln Park synchronize with the mechanical as well. Here you see the essence of vehicles, and you see the Aztec warrior there in the center, amidst kind of floating above the air amidst the streets. So there's that. You notice that the important synchronization of this mechanical with the natural, with the divine, with the surreal, with the mythical. I mean, it's something very interesting, these murals. And evident as well is the conception of faith. There's something about the notion of a chapel or of a church, right? And then of course there's the iconic influence of the Virgin Mary, and how the roses are a root that come from that essence of the Virgin Mary, the remembrance of the Virgin Mary. So perhaps it's a shifting over from the mythical hopes of Aslan onto maybe the new Aslan, right, which is this sense of faith by means of the Virgin Mary, is perhaps the most well-known saint, certainly in the Americas of sorts. And in addition, right, not just there, but in addition, there's also a not just at Lincoln Park, but this idea of the murals. These are present all throughout El Paso. Here's another image, a representative of that nature marker, and this is a mural by Christine Apodaca, and you see it, right, the essence of life within nature itself. Of course, there's a bit of irony here in that it's stapled on on a concrete wall, so to speak. And also here, of an entity holding a home, right? Holding a home with solar panels. I think the solar panels is very interesting for it is this idea of the solar panels that gives an interesting inference to independency away from the demands of industry. And there at the front of the door, right, lies the words libre, libre, or free and free. At the entrance of the Museum of El Paso, see there the mariachi there with the hat. You see it there also. This is a little bit of a different type of mural. But, the mariachi, of course, has roots in Mexico. And of influence, of course, is how it certainly, not just El Paso, right, but across the nation, it transcends this idea of music. Music also, it transcends, across the borders. And in essence, these are the claims of murals in El Paso, and they are not just about the here, but they're about the here and the there, and these are the claims of the murals of El Paso. Thank you.